Fiona's Lace by Patricia Polacco. For Mick and Annie Hughes, and to brave firefighters everywhere. Many years ago, my father's family lived in a small, poor village a few miles from Limerick in Ireland. Everyone in the village depended on the textile mill that was soon to close. Many of the villagers were unsure of their futures, but Glencarry was their home and all that any of them had ever known. My father's great grandmother Fiona told him later that she and her younger sister Ailish used to wait by the front gate almost every day to greet their father as he came home from the mill. Let's see, here they are. Their mother Annie was known far and wide for her hearty soups and lovely bread. Supper in the Hughes household was a celebration of good food. But the best part of supper for Fiona and Ailish was to hear their father Mick tell grand stories. Da, do tell us about how you got mother to marry you, Fiona whispered. Oh yeah, Da, tell us, Ailish chirped. Their father's eyes blazed as he began. Now ye can believe this, or ye can believe it not, he started. The girls and the mother leaned in. Back when your mother and I worked at the textile mill in Limerick, I used to walk by the lace parlour on me way to lunch. He paused. Fiona smiled broadly at Ailish. They knew this story by heart. That is when I saw the most beautiful little lass I'd ever laid eyes on. Oh, such talk, Mick. You've been kissing the blarney, their mother blushed. So I asked all the other girls in the parlour where she lived so I could come a calling to spark her, but none of them would tell me. One day as I left my mill, I noticed a little lovely bit of lace tied to a bush just down by the lane. I could see the other bits of lace tied to trees, bushes, front stoops, lampposts further on. I recognised her lace. So I followed it down the paths and lanes until I stopped just about in front of the little darling cottage. I looked further on and I saw no more of 'em. So I knew this was your mother's house. Fiona and Ailish tittered. 'Twasn't more than a fortnight that I come courting your mum. We were married right here at St. Timothy's, and I brought me bride back home to this very house, carried her over the threshold just there, he said with a sweeping gesture. Both you girls were born right here next to the hearth, said their mother, added dearly. To think a trail of lace brought you to our mum, Fiona said, dreamily. So she really liked him, and she wanted him to know where he lived, so she put trails of lace for him to follow. That's how he found where she lived. Just then, as she did every evening, Fiona ran to get her day's handiwork to show her father. Her mother was teaching her how to be a fine lace maker. Mum showed me the secret running stitch today, Fiona said proudly as she held a small pillow covered with lace in front of her father's face. Hi, Fiona. Your mother was one of the most finest lace makers in all of Limerick, father said wistfully as he smiled. Sure, the arthritis has stopped all that, Mick, and he said quietly. She tried to smile, but it was heartbreaking to tell that Annie's fingers were so swollen from the pain. Oh, her mother can't make lace anymore. Her fingers have arthritis, so it's hard for her to do that handiwork anymore. Fiona will be grander than I ever hoped to be, and as soon as she is old enough, we'll take her to the parlour in Limerick, and she'll be their best. Annie crowed proudly as she inspected her daughter's lace. Times were already hard in Ireland, but harder still in Glencarry. The mill closed as rumored, and it broke many a man who forced families to leave and all they knew and seek work elsewhere. Oh, where will we go, Mick? Annie said one day. Her heart was deeply troubled. One day their neighbour, Mrs. O'Flaherty, spoke to Annie over the back fence. My Jocko and I have signed a contract. That's what we do, and we'll get passage to America, she said as she hung up her watch. A contract to do what? Annie said. To serve a wealthy family in America. We're going to be a domestic service for them. You mean you'll be their maid? Annie asked. And of course, and Jocko will help on the grounds, and the wealthy family will pay our way there on a ship. And all we have to do is promise to work for them until the passage is paid off, Mrs. O'Flaherty answered. When Annie told Mick that evening, they stayed up into the wee hours of the night talking about it, and within a week, they too went to an agency and signed a contract to work for a family in Chicago, America. Chicago, America! Fiona yelped. Part of her was excited because she heard so much about America, but part of her was very sad, for she loved her little village. For the next week, it was hard for all of them. They had to decide what to take with them and what to leave behind. The last night they were home, Fiona and Ailish put out a bowl of milk for the leprechauns and the wee people and the fairies, just as they had done all their lives. Fiona, in America, servants have servants of their own. The streets are paved with gold, and we shall live in a fancy house. If only we could take the wee people to America with us. Do you think we could? Ailish asked her sister. No, Ailish. I think the only place the wee ones can be happy is here where the woodbine tinth under the forest, here in Glencarry, Fiona whispered. The next morning, Fiona's mother and father bade tearful farewells to lifelong friends. After old Mr. Fitzgerald helped them load the last bundle onto the wagon, the family climbed aboard, and as they left their homestead and village, they all looked back as long as they could. When they crested the hill, their beloved village disappeared behind a grove of trees. Ailish and Fiona cried for miles. So did their mother. Their father just stared off into the distance. They traveled most of that day and part of the night. When they arrived the next morning in Belfast, they made their way directly to the shipyard to board the steamer that was bound for America. They're so sad because they know that they probably will never go back to Ireland again. If you immigrated at that time, it was very expensive. They didn't have the money to go back, so they were leaving their home forever. As the ship pulled away from the docks, they took one of the longest last look at their beloved Ireland. Crossing the Atlantic was long and hard. Almost everyone aboard was seasick and miserable. To pass time, Fiona made lace, yards and yards of lace. Finally, they neared the harbor in New York, and they could hardly wait to set foot on dry land. When they did, they barely had time to be processed, and then they had to make their way directly to the train station to catch the train to Chicago. On the train, there were no bunks or cots to sleep in. They had to take turns sleeping on hard seats of a coach car. At least on the ship we had bunks to sleep in, said Annie wearily. Days passed. Fiona busied herself making more and more lace. The journey was bumpy, hot, and dusty. They stopped at many towns and cities, and every so many stops they brought bread and cheese. And finally, one day, the conductor announced that they were approaching Chicago. Oh, we're here, Ailish crowed happily. The train pulled through what seemed like miles and miles of stockyard full of cattle. They could see a big city, tall buildings off in the distance. I'm guessing the cattle are be waiting to be slaughtered. The Americans eat well, I'll be bound. There must be a joint of beef on every table, their father sung out. Look, Mother, the sea is right next to Chicago. I wonder why we didn't have the ship just bring us right here, Fiona said. Ah, that is Lake Michigan, folks. And it sure does look big enough to be an ocean, doesn't it? The conductor said. Oh, look how fancy. At the depot in Chicago, there were drivers for hire with wagons to take travelers home. Fiona had the address of the rooming house that their employers had arranged, and as they drove through the city, Fiona couldn't believe her eyes. Every building was grander than the last, row upon row of them. Elegant people were strolling with arms full of packages. Oh, look at those lovely frocks, Annie sighed. Ah, made with fine Irish lace, I'll wager, the father answered. Is this where we're going to be living? Ailish chirped excitedly. Our flat is on Deaconin Street. Is that near here? The father asked the driver. The driver smiled. No, sir. We got quite a ways to go, he answered. Oh, no. So this is where they're going to be living. Looks really different than they thought. The farther they drove, the clearer it became they were coming into a part of Chicago that wasn't so grand. The streets were crowded with spruikers selling their wares from wagons. The buildings and houses were shabby and run down. This is it, 120 DeConan Street, the driver sang out, and then he helped them unload their luggage up the rickety stairs. Yoo-hoo, Annie! It was Mrs. O'Flaherty, their neighbour from Glencarry. We work for the same family. They told us you were coming and I tidied up your flat and I made your beds, she called out. This must be a mistake, Mother. If you and Dad are working for fine rich folks, why would they be putting us up in a place like this? Fiona whispered to her mother. Annie and the girls cleaned and swept while Father went for supplies. After a good scrubbing, and after they covered the shabby old furniture with throws and quilts they'd brought, the two-room flat was almost livable. They had never seen a place like it. The sink and dry kitchen were in one room. The other room was crowded with 3 beds. Annie and Mrs. O'Flaherty had worked as kitchen maids for the same family. It took 3 trolley rides just to get there each day. I can't wait for our first pay packet. The girls will be needing some new shoes when they're starting school, Annie whispered as she scrubbed the floor. Pay packet? Mrs. O'Flaherty scoffed. Don't you know that you won't be getting pay for serving them? They paid your way here, so every penny that you earn belongs to them until you repay them. Remember, they're charging us rent for that rat trap we live in. They own it, and they'll be levying your uniform against it as well, Pert Haggerty, another maid, added. But how will we live then? Annie muttered. You'll have to take second jobs and work in the evening, darling. We all do, you know. Oh, so this is not nearly as nice as I thought it was going to be. The other maids were quite right. Both Annie and Mick took second jobs, Mick at the slaughterhouse and Annie scrubbing laundry at a downtown hotel. But it wasn't long before Mrs. O'Flaherty told Annie about a posh dressmaker in the city. They're looking for fine Irish lace, and your Fiona makes the finest I've ever seen, Mrs. O'Flaherty crowed. Annie made an appointment and took Fiona to show her lace to the store buyers. And sure enough, they were heartily impressed. They made an offer right on the spot to pay a pretty penny for Fiona's lace. We'll buy as much as the girl can make. When Annie and Fiona got home and told Ailish and Father the news, they decided right then and there to have a party. Now we'll be able to save money and buy our own home right here in America, Annie called out as she danced around the room. Oh, I know just the place, too. We'll be crossing that great sea they call Michigan Lake, and we're going to go buy land, Father sung out. We'll have a sweet farm and maybe some sheep, Ailish cooed. What is this place where we're going, Da? Fiona said. Michigan, he crowed as he reached for a tin whistle. That evening, all of their neighbors gathered and sang and danced, and some of them even while holding pieces of Fiona's lace. To Fiona, they sang as they whirled around the room. This lass and her lace will save the Hughes family, Mrs. O'Flaherty called out. The Lord bless us all, Annie whispered. The celebration went on for almost until it was time for Mass the next morning. As the months passed, it wasn't long before the Hughes family had put away money in a tea tin on the high shelf of the kitchen. It was the month of October. All Hallows' Eve would be coming. One night before, their father and mother left before their night jobs. Father sat down to tell them a story. So All Hallows' Eve is Halloween, so he's going to tell them a spooky story. This is about the puka, a ghostly black horse that is harnessed to the coast of Bower, the carriage of death. The banshee screeches and pounds on the door to collect the souls that have passed from this life, Father said, as he pretended to shiver. I don't want this story, Da. I want to hear about the trail of lace you took Mum again, Ailish insisted. Darling, you know that one by heart. I want to hear it too, Da. I want to hear about Glencarry and Miss Ireland. Their father obliged them, and then he and her mother hugged Fiona and Ailish for the night. Remember, my precious lambs, keep Sabbath, love the Lord. It is in your heart that the home resides, and it will remain there as long as you can remember those you love, the mother whispered as they both slipped out the door. When Ailish fell asleep, Fiona made lace for what seemed like hours. As she looked up to rest her eyes, she noticed the light was glowing through the window. That was late. What could it be? She heard shouting and people running about. There was a pounding on the door. Oh, it's the banshee coming for us, Ailish screamed, waking from a deep sleep. Then they heard a voice call out, Fire! Fire! There's a fire! Run for your lives! With that, Fiona addressed Ailish, pulled on their shawls, grabbed the tea tin and her bolt of lace, and ran for the door, pulling for her crying sister. They were all but tumbled down the rickety stairs and made for the alley. There were people everywhere running and screaming. As Fiona looked back down the alley, she could see nothing but flames lapping at the sky. It was dark and smoky, and just then, like a clanging bell, neighing horses and thundering hooves rushed past them. "It's the Pooka and the Costa Bar!" Ailish shrieked. "No, Ailish, it's the fire wagon. They're coming to put down the fire," Fiona called out as she pulled her sister along. "Where's Mum and Dad? Where are they? Oh, if our house burns down, how will they ever find us?" Ailish sobbed. Fiona didn't answer. They ran and ran until they could taste blood in the back of their throats. "Where are we going, Fiona? Where?" Ailish pouted. We're doubling back to our house. The fire has already been there and it won't be back," Fiona answered urgently. "But how will Mum and Dad ever find us?" Ailish sobbed again. Fiona took out a bolt of lace. Her scissors were still around her neck. She pulled some lace and she started cutting it. "No, Fiona, your beautiful lace, your lovely lace!" Ailish screamed and she began to be hysterical. "Ailish, this is the only way. We'll leave a trail of my lace. That's how Mum and Dad will find us," Fiona said softly, trying to comfort her sister. "Oh, this is just like her father left found the trail of lace that her mother left." Just as Fiona tied her last bit of lace to the doorway of a basement, Ailish crawled in. They huddled in there for what seemed like hours through darkness of night. From time to time, Fiona thought she heard voices, but then they'd get faint and disappear. At morning's light, Ailish started to cry again. "Ma and Dad should have found us by now. They should have," she said through her sobs. "The trail of lace will bring 'em right here to us. I know it, Ailish. I know it." Fiona tried to comfort her. "Well, what if they perished in this awful fire? There's nothing left of Chicago, nothing." Ailish sobbed even harder. It was exactly at that moment when they heard a familiar voice. "My lambs! My wee little lambs!" It was their mother, and she and their father were both clutching pieces of sooty lace. "We've been looking for hours. We'd almost given up hope," the mother said as she held them close. "And that's when we saw it. The first little glimmer of hope. Your lace, Fiona. Your lace tied to a lamppost," the father cried. "So we followed it. We followed each and every little bundle of it," Mother answered. "And it brought us right here to you, my darling. Right here to you," said Father, as tears rolled down his cheeks. "But Mother, Fiona's lace is ruined. It's covered with smoke and soot," Ailish whispered. "No, darling. This is her most beautiful creation, soot and all, for it saved you both, and us as well," their mother cried as she held them close. "We and generations after us will cherish this lace, Fiona. Always, always," their father exclaimed. Mick Hughes was so right. My father's family has indeed cherished the pieces of Fiona's lace for so many generations now. Most of the brides of my family wore it in their veils or carried it in their bouquets or pinned it next to their hearts of their wedding gowns. I keep Fiona's lace framed in an honored place in my home, but actually, it fills a hallowed place in my heart. For every time I walk by it or gaze upon it, I think of my darling mother, his father, my aunties and uncles, the wee people and the spirit of Ireland they have all embodied. And then I find myself thanking the Lord, and I remember, just as Annie charged her two daughters, that home is where the heart resides, and it will remain there as long as those that I love are remembered. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you for all your astonishing legacy, and most of all, thank you for your precious lace. The end. Again, based on a true story.